Well, Matthew, I'll go ahead and ask you at least our first question. Like, Pilot Say What?
It's what?
Exactly. Welcome to the 12th episode of Pilot Say What, where we hear what pilots have to say. And today we do have Matthew. That's our intro, and I'm glad to have you on here. Matthew's one of our CFIs. Maybe I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit. Maybe.
Again, Matthew.
Yeah.
Matthew's the name. Been here since October 19th was when I got hired. Joined as a student, and that was in 2023.
Mhm.
Joined as a student in January of 2023. Do one of the MEIs along with Les. Do a lot of multi-unit training. But yeah, been here for, I guess, about 8 months now.
So in this episode, we'll talk a little bit about maybe what sort of planes we have, including the multi-engine planes, and then we'll talk a little bit about some developments with thrust flight, just so that people are aware. And then, of course, we're going to get to know Matthew. That way, we can get a little bit of insight into what it's like being maybe even a CFI or someone who's on their way to the next part of their career. How do you like being a CFI?
I enjoy it. It's
Yeah.
definitely a big learning curve
Yeah.
and a challenge.
Yeah.
You can kind of the learning curve can sneak up on you a little bit.
Yeah.
It's funny.
So I've been told.
Yeah. I found my time as a student was really enjoyable. I think I like being a student. Just learning all the time. And it's funny because you're always a student, right?
Yeah, always.
Even Mick, one of the chiefs here, the other day he said, I've been a student pilot for 45 years now, but you're always a student pilot. And that's one of the biggest takeaways so far from instruction. And a big part of that learning curve
Yeah,
is all the
gotcha.
learning that you got to continue doing.
What's it like being able to help students that maybe remind you of the way you were learning?
It's kind of cool. It's kind
Yeah.
of cool, especially because there's a lot of different ways that you can maybe get hung up on something, right? Um, but in the rare or semi-rare circumstance where somebody's getting hung up on something just like you got hung up on it,
Yeah.
or you can really kind of see a little bit of yourself in them,
Yeah.
it's pretty cool because you can kind of make a strong connection with the student,
Yeah.
and feel like you have the right answer to get them
Yeah.
through that moment or whatever. But yeah,
It's
I
nice
think
to
that's pretty
nice to
cool.
feel like you have something that you kind of wish you needed, that
Yeah,
you wish you had when you needed it.
yeah,
So I
exactly.
understand that because I mean I teach some things. I help some people with videography and stuff. So
Oh, okay.
so it's nice to be like, oh, I found that out already. I got you. So that's fun. Well, I hear I want to kind of move into. I hear that we're getting some new planes, and I haven't really got to ask anyone about that yet. Do you know anything about any of the new planes we're getting?
Yeah, I know that the two of the most recent planes that we got are they're Piper Archer LXs instead of the TXs, which is most of the fleet.
Hmm.
Um, Cool thing about them is where the TXs were more so designed with training in mind,
Hmm.
the LXs were kind of marketed, I guess, more toward the private market.
Hmm.
But what's cool about that is they have a little bit more of the comfort features that you might not get out of the TX. For instance, even one of them, you know how your car, a lot of times they'll have like the electric lumbar support where you can
Yeah.
stick it up and it'll
Yeah.
support your lower back a little bit. One of them, I know at least one of them, Delta Alpha has that, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's
It
pretty
makes
nice.
you feel pretty nice in there. I could use some of that lumbar support as a
Yeah, no, I've been
CFI.
in there too, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting, but I haven't been in any of the LXs,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I could imagine needing that. Even my office chair, I'm like, hey, can I have one of y'all's? Because I sat in one of theirs the other day. It's really nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we got a couple of those now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Couple of the new Alexas. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Do you have you flown a lot of different kinds of planes? I mean, if you've been through thrust flight most of the time, I don't know if you're flying outside of thrust flight at all, but have you mostly flown just Piper Archers and maybe some Cessnas?
Yeah, at the Part 61
Hmm.
school that I went to before thrust flight, I flew a Cessna, just kind of old, um, kind of rinky-dink Cessna, like you hear about the Part 61 schools
Yeah.
flying potentially. But it was a great experience.
Yeah. And get
And
to
then
hands on, so yeah.
yeah, exactly. And then here, Archers, and then a little bit of Cessnas here as well. I
Mhm.
got a chance to fly a Mooney while I was in
Nice.
CFI Academy. Met a guy, and those are pretty cool.
Well, let me ask you, what kind of got you into aviation? Were you kind of looking forward to this when you were younger? Did you kind of think, like, did you meet someone? What kind of brought you into aviation?
Oh, it's funny. It's definitely when I was really young. Actually, I grew up in Mexico, in southern Mexico,
Hmm.
and it didn't really seem like it was an opportunity. I guess down there, and other places, I think it seems a little bit more far fetched.
Yeah.
And so, growing up, early age, I didn't really see it as something that was very attainable.
Uh-huh.
And then I got out of high school, went to community college for a while, was bartending at the time.
Hmm.
Um, Actually, going to get an economics degree, and
Hmm.
I had talked with a buddy about becoming a pilot,
Yeah.
um, and I think I saw maybe it was something on the news, but the pilot shortage made it seem a lot
Mm,
more attainable. It
mm,
just I had never realized how attainable it was. Just part of me always thought you have to be maybe in the military,
yeah.
like to to ever make a really good career out of it. Um, but once I found out that it was attainable, I was like, well, we'll give it a shot. So I did a discovery flight at the Part 61 school that I went to.
And then
It
even
was
then, like, what was the step that said, um, did you Google something? Did you say, hey, how to like where can I fly? Where can I take a flight? Like, did someone tell you about that? Do you recall where you heard that from, or is it just somehow that's where your brain already was? You're already aware of a discovery flight.
well,
Just
I had some industrious friends, like I said, and we
okay.
would chat about everything.
Oh, okay.
And I think it
Okay.
was actually one of my friends that kind of told me he told me a little bit about the process because he had looked into it a little bit.
Okay.
I was like, okay.
Okay. That's all
So
it took, right?
yeah, exactly. So I was in Tyler and I started looking at places around where I was where you could maybe do a discovery flight,
Hmm.
and kind of looking into the process of where you would go from having no experience to potentially making a career out of it.
Hmm.
And then yeah, once I got in the plane, it was pretty dang cool.
Yeah,
It was
pretty
pretty
cool.
cool, man. Yeah.
And when you originally chose to go to Part 61 school and kind of like begin this journey, did you know that you kind of want to go further with it? What were you thinking when you started?
I kind of jumped right into it.
Yeah.
I did the discovery flight and that was it as far as trying it.
Okay.
And then after that, it's just bet on yourself.
Yep.
Always been one of those guys who's like, I'm just gonna bet on myself and see where it goes.
Mhm.
Um, and throughout my private training, there were some moments that were tough,
Mhm.
but I found the overall experience to be encouraging,
Mhm.
and it led me toward when I passed my private check ride. That was really the final moment where it was, either I'm going to go do this as a career,
Mm.
or I'm going to lean back and maybe not do it as a career. But
But
I
yeah, I mean, it
guess
got you started, right? And that's all you were. I mean, it sounds like what I like about that is it sounds like you were just want to go ahead and get started. And a lot of people are too worried about the big picture sometimes enough to get started. And it sounds like you're like, well, once I finish my private, well, now what's next? And I don't know. I like to think that way myself.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
like to just bet on myself and figure it out from there.
exactly.
I mean, it's not like it's impossible because people do it. And once you learned it was attainable, that's all you needed. Well, then after you get your private, what brought you to thrust?
Well, I guess I skipped a step because
Mhm.
before I got my private, I actually went to LeTourneau, which is a 4 year in Longview. It's a
Mhm.
aviation university,
Uh-huh.
um, and that
Oh,
was gonna take like 6 years before I
okay.
would be where I am now. It was gonna be like a 6 year process at one of the 4 year schools,
Mhm.
and it was gonna cost me about twice what I ended up paying here.
Yeah.
Um, so I did that for a semester, and then I
Really?
was talking to some other guys that were there, and I guess all their parents were rich or something, but they were just totally okay with maybe like $250,000, $230,000 by the time it's all said and done. I don't think I'm okay with that. It seems like there's probably a more efficient way. So I started
Yeah.
looking into places, really just judging it off of efficiency, quality of training versus the amount of money to get that quality of training.
Mhm.
And of course, there's a few schools that come up
Yeah.
when you look into that,
Yeah.
and Thrust was one of them.
Yeah.
So I talked to Nathan on the phone and had some questions. The big thing that separated it for me was the ground school, right?
Mm.
It's not all self led study,
Mm.
which I like self led study, but having the ground school as a guidance,
Mhm.
uh, and to kind of you get to see other classmates and you get to share your concerns and kind of brainstorm with them to figure out problems. That was a big selling point for me, and that's really probably ultimately why I came here.
I like that. And a lot of people don't. It's hard to paint a good picture of what it's like when you get here. Whether like, because I know some programs, it's like you said, very self-led, and
Mhm.
then like at something like a university, you're on a curriculum,
Yeah, yeah.
So this is a school where we do have ground school, and there are classes with some sort of direction. You get a primary CFI, things like that, right?
Mm.
So it's hard to kind of paint the exact picture of what's going on here. So it's always interesting to hear like what people's perception was once they got in,
Yeah.
or even why they came. But I hear that ground school's a good reason to come here.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's big.
yeah, yeah.
It's big for sure. And the main thing is that it helps with the self-directed study.
Hmm.
Because it's not like to take you away from being
Exactly.
self-directed, but it helps guide you along with your studies that you're doing outside of school.
Gotcha. Well, so you started with a group of people. Do you kind of everyone has their own pace. Did you find like a group of people that you tended to work with often?
It kind of varies.
Uh-huh.
For like some individuals varied. You know, as you go along in different ratings, you find different individuals at the time. But there was one guy when I
Mhm.
was in instrument rating that we clicked. We were both kind of similar mindset and such,
Mhm.
and so we just kind of pushed through the first few ratings together.
That's
He
what's up.
actually he ended up leaving and going to the Coast Guard, but
Oh
he
wow.
was pretty solid, and we used each other as a resource and helped each other out a lot.
That's nice.
Um, and then after that, once you get to CFI and double I, uh,
Yeah.
you really gotta hammer down, and it's up to you at that point.
Yeah. Either
But
way, right?
yeah, but it's pretty crucial actually. In CFI Academy, I found a group of guys to study FOIs, fundamentals of instruction,
Yeah.
and that was really helpful too. Yeah.
Whether it be Part 6141 or even a university, is there something like that that you would say, or how would someone choose between those things? Would you say?
Well,
It sounds like you did all three. That's why I asked.
what made my choice the I guess the downside of the university, which I mean, no, kind of the guys that are coming out of there are great on the ground. You get a
Yeah.
lot of time on the ground, but it's slower paced in the air. You're flying less frequently, and overall, it's a longer process for
Mhm.
the same goal. And we only get a limited amount of time, right, in life, so
Yeah.
wasting time isn't great.
Yeah.
And then as far as the 61 schools are concerned, there is some freedom there,
Mhm.
which is cool. Um, but with that comes a little bit more risk potentially.
Mhm.
Um, and there's other outside factors like the DPs really like the
Mm.
especially as the market gets flooded with people trying to get their ratings.
Yeah.
The DPs aren't they're not the amount of DPs isn't growing at the same rate that the amount of
Mhm.
students is growing. So they become more constrained and it gets harder to schedule with them. Um, so I mean, really having the EOC examining authority now, and that wasn't even a selling. Like this was such a good school even without it.
Right.
When I was making the decision to come here, that now that we have it, it's
Yeah. I
and people are
guess.
able to get accelerated like they are. It's kind of a no brainer.
One thing I'm curious about, I haven't got to talk to anyone about because we've talked a lot about our Piper Archers, and then even like the new ones. We have the training experiences, and then we have the LX, right? Which I gotta check out myself. The Seminole. Do you fly the Seminole?
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
often, more often than anything else. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So, is there certain CFIs that kind of pay a little bit more attention to the kind of specialize in each rating, or maybe certain CFIs that work mostly with the Seminole?
Yeah, there'd be a few of us that are mostly doing multi. There's guys that mostly do CFI. It's just
Uh-huh.
kind of a time and place thing where you ended up where they need somebody at the time, and I guess however that matches up with your skill set or what yeah.
So what is one of the main things that you would think a student kind of needs to understand when they're going into training for uh, their multi-engine rating?
So when you're first starting out in multi, the biggest thing that I would tell you is any anything that you could maybe get away with in a little bit slower single engine airplane.
Huh?
A couple weaknesses that you might have had. We're gonna have to get rid of
Mm,
some of those weaknesses because everything's happening faster, right? So everything's
yeah,
it's not incredibly faster, but maybe 10-20% faster.
yeah,
Most of the time, the actual flying of the twin isn't that much more difficult. It's the we don't have as much maybe downtime
yeah.
that you would have in a single engine, so you can't get away with as many things as you could
I
otherwise.
see what you're saying. It's a little bit more tight knit. It sounds like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
And then like is landing something that's much different? What do you think like one of the main differences?
The side picture is going to be different when you're landing.
Okay.
Um, Not incredibly different. It's just a little bit lower in the Seminoles.
Okay.
Um, but it's actually easier to land. It's a little bit heavier. You're going to get a
Mm,
little bit potentially less ballooning
mm,
that you maybe see in the Archer.
yeah.
But yeah, I actually think it's a quite a bit easier to land. Yeah.
Yeah, then that's one thing is I haven't heard much about like what it goes into some of that rating. Are there maneuvers that are specific to uh that rating, the multi-engine rating?
Yeah. Well, a lot of the stuff that you're going to be doing during multi is going to be stuff that you've already done, like steep
Okay.
turns, stalls, stuff like that.
Hmm.
But the new stuff, think about it, it's a twin, right? Um, so there's different aerodynamics that come with that.
Okay.
And there's going to be a lot of situations where, when I was actually at Laterno, one of the instructors there said, there's kind of a joke around twins, like twins.
Yeah.
The extra engine is just to take you to the scene of the crash quicker,
Yeah.
right? And so I guess what we're preparing for and what you're getting tested on is a lot of operating with an engine failure.
Mm,
So just operating on one engine with the asymmetrical thrust.
okay, I see what you're saying.
Um, and the different kind of aerodynamics, how the airplane performs
Yeah.
on a single engine. But yeah, that would be the biggest difference.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's nice. Have you flown a plane without air conditioning? I've been asking that question lately because it's an
Yes.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But
Yeah.
all my Part 61 training was in the heat of the summer,
Oh man.
without air conditioning, and it made a world of difference. I mean, you're
Yeah.
eliminating outside factors that could hinder your learning. So,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. On the
Because most
mountain,
people in Dallas are gonna understand, right? I
yeah.
mean, you go up there and you're sweating, right?
Oh
So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, it was you sweat so much, you lose so much water
Yeah.
around here if you're flying in the summer with no AC.
Hmm.
It's like, I mean, it's at the last box, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
it magnifies the heat. He doesn't have anywhere to go.
More like an oven. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. You want that AC.
Okay. Well, I was just curious about some of those things. Then, I did want to say, do you know about the new location?
I know a little bit
A
about
little
it.
bit about it.
Just what you hear people talking about. I hear the hangars are really nice. The
Yeah, I'm hearing
facilities
it's
are going to
really
be great.
nice out in
Yeah,
Conroe, right?
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I haven't been over there yet. I hear that's pretty nice. I hear I think I can say this now, but we're starting classes within about a month already. So we're moving pretty quick. It sounds like we're getting moving some of the fleet down there, some new planes and stuff.
Crazy, yeah.
So I'm curious if they're gonna have us fly down there and take a look at it. Do you
That'd be
think
pretty cool.
they'll? Is there any reason why they would have you go down there, or any reason why you would fly down there? Do you know?
Well, I mean, on cross countries, we go down south a time. I've been in Conroe before
Hmm.
on a cross country.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
so if I ever head that way again, I'm definitely if I'm in Conroe, I'm gonna stop and check the new location out for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Yeah, I want
For
to go see
sure.
what it's looking like. They'll probably
Yeah.
have me make some videos on what it looks like out there, but I want to go check it out soon.
Yeah.
I can't believe we moved that fast. I don't know what it's been looking like over there. So
Yeah. Doing a
and
good job.
that's a big step though. That's our third school. So we have one in Denison, we have here in Addison, and then now we're gonna have one out there in Conroe. And that's the furthest out we've moved. So it's just kind of exciting to be a part of the company at this time.
Yeah.
Um,
Must be doing something right.
well, I want to ask some tips about something, and I don't know what yet, but I've
Okay.
been hearing you. I hear that uh, students struggle with certain things. Like I don't know if there's like your favorite thing to coach on. Is there a maneuver or something that maybe you struggled with that you like to teach on?
My favorite thing to teach is landings.
Yeah. Okay.
I I had some struggles during CFI. I moved to the right seat, and my
Hmm.
I don't know what happened, but I just lost the ability to land there for
Yeah.
a month or so. Um, but moving past that and just kind
Hmm.
of leaning on my own experiences, I really enjoy taking people up, just beating up the pattern,
Hmm.
working out some of those kinks. Starting at the bottom. A lot of times, what happens is uh, when you see people that might maybe have trouble with landings, it's they skip the bottom. They don't have it. You have to build the baseline. So
Yeah.
I enjoy going out there and working. Starting over at the bottom and working our way up and
Hmm.
developing landings that are consistently good.
What do you do to kind of fix that?
Well, it's all about consistency, and it
Uh-huh.
starts. I mean, it's in every phase of flight, but really, when you get into the pattern, um,
Hmm.
that's when any mistake that you make early in the pattern or things that you're doing
Hmm.
inconsistently early in the pattern, I always say you're going to pay for it on final.
Hmm.
That's what I tell my guys. If you're coming into the downwind and you're maybe too slow or too fast,
Hmm.
taking too long to descending
Already.
too fast, yeah,
Yeah.
because then you're going to end up turning final and you're going to be 200 feet, 300 feet low or 400 feet high,
Hmm.
and now you're having inconsistent rates of descent, inconsistent side pictures, what you're looking at when you're coming down to the runway, um, inconsistent air speeds. And so really you
Yeah.
start in the downwind and you build consistency from there all the way through base to final,
Hmm.
consistent procedures. And if you can start doing that, then you can really progress from there and start adding things. But really, like I say, it's all about consistency. The more stuff you do
That makes sense
consistent
though.
results you'll get. Yeah.
Are there some key indicators, maybe using your instruments, or is there a certain what elevation are you supposed to be at? That kind of stuff. I'm wondering if there's anything that someone should be looking for to make sure they're consistent at it. So they say, "Hey, I'm hitting this, this, and this. I should be good to go into my base turn after this, at an appropriate angle or whatever it might be."
Yeah.
What does that look like on in the plane?
Well, if let's just say you're coming in standard 45-degree midfield entry to the downwind, you want to be 1,000 feet above traffic pattern altitude, a mile out,
Hmm.
and then you get a beam. You'll reduce your power. I like to
Hmm.
do 1,700 RPM in the Archer, and then you'll add a notch of flaps when you're in the wide arc below flaps extension speed,
Hmm.
and then you'll start a 500 foot per minute descent.
Hmm.
Now, a lot of times, a big difference maker is consistently. Starting your turn to base
Hmm.
at a certain altitude and distance
And that's what I'm wondering too.
from the
Yeah.
runway. Yeah. So you want to be about 200 feet below traffic pattern altitude. You want to have descended about 200 feet
Hmm.
by the time you're starting that turn. And a lot of times visually, when you're looking outside, you'll notice that your desired aiming point,
Hmm.
your beam point, will be about 45 degrees off your shoulder there
Okay.
whenever you're starting that turn. Um,
And you say 45 degrees, you mean like 45 degrees ahead? Um, when you say 45 degrees, you're saying you're behind or ahead of it?
so it'd be behind. It would be
Okay,
behind.
I'm just making sure yeah, I
Yeah.
gotcha.
So just right
Okay.
off there, off your shoulder.
Okay, I
Yes,
gotcha.
sir.
Oh, okay,
So,
I understand.
yeah.
But so you see that maybe that's not always the case for people. Like that's the consistency you'd be looking for, right?
Yeah, that's an early indicator. Okay,
Okay,
that's an early indicator of where we can develop consistency right there.
gotcha. Yeah.
Whether you're descending too fast or not descending enough, and a lot of that starts with your speed and the downwind.
And that's
Um,
what I was wondering is what kind of stops someone from getting to that place? Is it maybe the lack of the knowledge of like, hey, maybe wasn't 200 feet below traffic patterns, or is it usually like a common mistake, or is it just like maybe a precision thing? Because it's not that easy. I know
yeah.
it's a maneuver, right? Can you point out any common mistakes there?
I I just call it compromising. You start out
Okay.
with small compromises, right?
Okay.
Maybe I'm 50 feet below traffic pattern altitude. Okay, well that's okay. I'm within 100 feet, right?
Mm,
But that leads to bigger compromises. That's kind
yes.
of what I always say, and it's the same thing throughout the entire traffic pattern. You make small compromises early on, you're going to end up making bigger compromises, and that's
Mm,
when things can get out of hand, or you start maybe getting into unstable approaches. Um, but yeah,
I like
don't
that.
make compromises with yourself.
Yeah.
Try to be as precise as you can and as consistent as you can. Um,
Yeah.
all this stuff is fixable, things you can fix. So why not fix it, right? Why
Right.
compromise at all? Yeah.
Right. I mean, I like that answer because you want to have it almost the same every time, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that you can't land the plane after making compromises, it sounds like. You can get it on the ground,
Yeah.
but it's not only about doing it safely. It's not only about, taking care of the plane itself and then or even just passing, a rating, right? It's the consistency offers you a lot more down the road because now you're considering less and you're doing the same thing every time. And then
Exactly.
when you get to like something like the Power Off 180, when you have less to help you with your compromises, like
Exactly.
power or something like that, then you don't have to worry about making mistakes. Or, I'm sorry, fixing those sort of bad behaviors
Yeah.
later on, and that's what it sounds like is happening sometimes for someone. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, does that sound accurate, like what I said?
Sounds exactly
Oh,
right.
okay,
Yeah, we're
cool.
just you're eliminating variables, right?
Yeah,
And then when you get to something like the Power Off 180,
yeah,
you've already knocked out 6 or 7, 8 variables. So you
yeah,
throw in a new variable, it's a lot easier to handle
yeah,
than if you already got 4 or 5 other variables
yeah,
going on while
exactly.
you're in the pattern. Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. And then, well, I guess just to finish that off, once you've already kind of hit some of those points and you're in a downwind, is there any other tips you have for the rest of maybe a standard landing?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
be about 200 feet below traffic pattern
Mhm,
altitude, turning base, like we
mhm,
said.
mhm,
And then when you're turning final, well, you'd add as soon as you turn base, you want to add that second notch flaps,
mhm,
and that'll start slowing you down. Because another thing that I notice is when people are inconsistent when they're adding people can be inconsistent when they're at what point they're adding the flaps,
mhm,
whether it's early in the base, late in the base, and such. Then you're getting inconsistencies with your airspeed,
mhm,
and maybe you'll
mhm,
pitch down to get that airspeed. Well, now you're getting inconsistencies with your altitude. So if you can keep that point at which you're inputting the flaps in consistent, then
mhm.
you'll get more consistent results with your airspeed. And then when you're turning final, before you turn final, you want to make sure nobody's coming in on final, maybe not making calls, especially at an untowered airport,
Yeah. Mhm,
and nothing's on the runway that's gonna be a problem for you.
mhm,
Um, but when you turn final, you want to be about 500 feet AGL above the runway,
mhm,
and then you want to be about a mile out for flying like an archer.
mhm.
Um, and that's another thing that I don't really want to compromise on.
Yeah.
And then I'll add my third notch of flaps on final, maybe a small power adjustment, but again, I'm trying to keep it about 1700 RPM every
Mhm.
single time. I mean, you might need to add a couple RPMs there, or take it out, or take a couple out, but not big adjustments.
All right.
And then you'll be looking for in the Archer 70 knots on final. But it's a gradual progression to that 70 knots. It's not as soon as I get on final, I need to be making a big adjustment
Mm.
to get down to 70 knots. You should be already close to that, and then you just kind of work to it as you go through the final.
And you're gonna be a lot closer to that if you did make compromises earlier on, right? Is
Exactly,
the point, and
exactly,
that's part of
exactly.
it. So it doesn't trickle down. Okay, well, I mean that sounds good. And then I think someone was talking about once you're getting to the ground, I don't know what the verbiage is, right? But I know once you get close, you kind of hit this like hover right above the ground before you
Yeah.
lay it down. What is that?
So
Just
that would be
another
ground
word.
effect. That would
Ground
be ground
effect.
effect. And really, what you're doing is you have a stable descent, nice, 3-degree glide slope. You're coming down towards your aiming point.
Hmm.
Um, and then when you get to that aiming point, you transition to straight and level and ground effect. So you just raise up, you're just flying straight and level.
Okay.
There's no, it doesn't have to be anything too special. And you're just trying to keep the plane from landing. Basically, you've pulled your power to idle when you've made that
Mm.
transition to straight and level. And what you're doing when the airplane's losing energy in ground effect.
Hmm.
Um, and then you can feel the yoke getting lighter as it loses energy because
Uh-huh.
there's less airflow over your stabulator,
I can understand that.
your control surface. So
Hmm.
the yoke's going to get a little lighter, and as it gets lighter, you can add small increments of back pressure, and that's going to pick your nose wheel up off the ground just enough that when you touch down, you're touching down on the mains
Hmm.
when it's finally bled off enough energy, and then you can set the nose wheel down gently after that. Yeah.
That makes sense. I feel like there's gonna be some good stuff in there. That's as a non-pilot, I try to be like, okay, let me see what I can pull out of there. But
Yeah.
I think it sounds like there's gonna be some good stuff in there for
Okay.
someone to hear, and maybe it'll help them out too. Especially if you're having these sort of conversations with your students.
Yeah.
Everyone sees these podcasts or listens on the streaming platforms, and they can get stuff like that out of it too. Like you said, we have all the Instagram clips, so we'll probably cut some of that stuff up. It'll be kind of fun.
Okay.
You'll see
Yeah. Yeah.
yourself.
Maybe I'll see myself. Look at that.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
of course, my name is Zach, and I'm your host for Pilot Say What. This is the 12th episode. We'll see you guys again next week, especially if you like or comment. Go ahead and just hit the subscribe button. You'll see our video pop up in your feed, hopefully. If you're already a subscriber and you really are getting a lot out of these, hit that little notification button up there, and you'll get a notification sent to your phone. I just say that because someone's like, I didn't even know y'all released one. And I was like, well, there you go. Anyhow, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about thrust flight, then go to our website. We'll have a link on our bio or in our description.